Stop seeking approval. A Zen lesson on inner peace. The front door has clicked shut. The voices of the evening have drifted away, and yet your chest still carries a strange, vibrating echo. You are lying here in the dark, but a part of your mind is still lingering at the gathering, standing under the bright lights, frantically checking the faces of others to see if you were accepted. Perhaps you are scanning the silent air, wondering if you spoke too much, if you laughed too loudly, or if the silence you left behind was heavy. There is a specific cold fatigue that arrives when you have spent hours trying to be exactly who everyone else needed you to be. It is the exhaustion of an identity that has been stretched thin, shaped into a shape that pleases the world, leaving you feeling strangely invisible inside your own skin. Right now, your heart might feel like a hollow reed that has been blown through by too many external winds, leaving you drained, empty, and quietly anxious. Let the weight of the room begin to settle around you in a completely different way tonight. The cool air coming through the window frame carries the scent of damp earth and wet grass, a slow reminder that the ground beneath this building is steady, dark, and completely unconcerned with human expectations. Feel the texture of the fabric beneath your hands, not as something you need to present nicely, but as a heavy, simple surface that is ready to hold you without asking for a single thing in return. Your shoulders, which have been held high and tight all day to maintain a pleasant posture, can finally begin to drop their guard. The small muscles around your eyes, the ones that smile automatically to make others comfortable, can relax into the darkness. Nothing is required of you now. The performance is over, the theater is dark, and you are safe enough to soften. You are not broken because you carry this deep ache for validation. What you are feeling right now is not failure. It is simply the natural weariness of a heart that has been carrying an impossible shield for far too long. Tonight, we will not force the mind to be silent, nor will we try to violently tear down your desire to be liked. We are not here to judge the part of you that craves a nod of approval, a kind word, or a sign that you belong. Instead, we are going to learn how to hold this fatigue differently, allowing the frantic rhythm of social survival to slow down until it meets something much older and deeper. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight, nor do you need to figure out how to be perfectly confident by tomorrow morning. Consider a strange paradox that lies at the very center of our suffering. The mind never becomes peaceful because you finally convince everyone to love you. It becomes peaceful when you realize that the version of you they are judging or praising was never your true nature to begin with. We often believe that if we can just adjust our voice, our appearance, or our achievements perfectly, we will finally build a self that is safe from rejection. But Buddhist wisdom points us toward a much quieter, liberating truth. The self we are trying so hard to protect, the one we continuously polish for the appraisal of others, is as empty and fluid as the wind passing through a valley. When you stop trying to anchor your worth in the shifting mirrors of other people's minds, the phantom fear of being inadequate simply loses its gravity. Maybe you have felt this too, the constant, subtle tension of living as a hollow instrument. When praise blows through you, there is a momentary high, a pleasant vibration that feels like security. But because wind always changes direction, the very next moment brings the terror of silence, the fear that if the wind stops, you will cease to exist. We spend our lives chasing the breeze, begging the world to breathe into us so we can make a beautiful sound. In a moment, a very old story will show us something even quieter, a way of being that does not rely on the breath of the crowd to find its weight. Take a slow breath in, letting the air travel deep down into your body, far past the throat where words are formed, down into the quiet center that has no need to explain itself to anyone. Imagine leaving the thin, windy air of public performance behind and descending into a narrow, damp ravine where the soil is thick and the ancient bamboo grows tall. In this place, the air is cool and smells of crushed green rind and wet peat. The sun only touches the valley floor for one brief hour at noon, leaving the rest of the night to be governed by a deep, velvety shadows. Here, there are no crowds, no judgments, and no expectations. There is only the slow, rhythmic sound of a distant mountain stream and the solid thud of earth beneath your feet. You have arrived at a place where you can safely lay down the heavy burden of being noticed, stepping into a sanctuary that requires no credentials, no smiles and no effort. Deep within this shadowed ravine lived an old mud brick builder named Soken, who spent his days far from the grand courts and bustling markets of the capital. In his earlier years, men said Soken could carve musical instruments so delicate that a single note could make an emperor weep. But he had long since abandoned the stage, choosing instead the heavy, unhurried rhythm of working with raw clay and river silt. To this isolated sanctuary came a young man named Jiro, an apprentice musician, whose hands were calloused not from manual labor, but from endless hours of practicing the flute. Jiro possessed a rare technical precision, yet his mind was a turbulent sea of anxiety. Whenever he played before an audience, his chest would tighten with a cold panic, his ears straining to catch the slightest murmur from the crowd, his heart fracturing whenever a listener looked away or failed to smile. He had traveled for days through the damp forests, driven by a desperate hunger to play for Soken, believing that if this legendary master gave him a single nod of approval, the gnawing sense of unworthiness inside his chest would finally disappear. When Jiro arrived, the twilight was deepening, casting long indigo shadows across the ravine floor. He found Soken kneeling by a low pit of wet loam, his forearms coated in gray mud as he mixed straw into the earth to form bricks. Jiro bowed low, his heart pounding against his ribs, and immediately began to speak of his dedication, his hours of practice, and his desire to demonstrate his skill on the instrument tucked safely inside his sleeve. The old man did not look up immediately. He finished shaping a square of wet clay, wiped his hands slowly on a coarse hemp rag, and listened to the youth's frantic, breathless words. Soken did not ask Jiro to pull out his flute. He did not ask to hear a single melody. Instead, he stood up, his joints popping slightly in the cool evening air, and walked over to a stack of weathered timber resting near the edge of the bamboo grove. From the damp grass at the base of the pile, Soken picked up a long, uncarved green bamboo stalk. It was a piece that had been cast aside. Forgotten by the elements, the old man walked back and placed the cold, heavy stalk into Jiro's slender hands. As Jiro held it, he noticed that the green skin was split wide open from the base to the middle node, cracked cleanly by the weight of a severe winter frost. The fracture was jagged, revealing the pale, dry fibers within. The stalk was completely hollow, open to the air, unable to hold any pressure or guide any breath. Jiro looked at the split wood, then at the builder, his confusion deepening the heavy silence that hung between them. Soken asked the young man what he saw when he held the ruined stalk. Jiro, wanting to appear knowledgeable and wise, replied that he saw a tragic waste, an instrument that could have played beautiful songs for the court, but was now broken, hollow, and utterly useless because it could no longer hold the breath of a musician. The old man smiled faintly, the deep wrinkles around his eyes softening in the dimming light. He told Jiro that the bamboo was only useless to someone who believed its only purpose was to be blown into by someone else. Soken explained that when the stalk grew in the grove, it did not grow to become an instrument for a king. It grew simply to reach its own roots into the dark loam and stand firm against the winter ice. The split in its skin was not a failure of its nature, but the simple mark of the frost meeting its hollow center. The old man told Jiro to slide his thumb along the rough, jagged edge of the split green rind. Jiro obeyed, the coldness of the plant transferring into his fingertips, the scent of crushed green pulp and damp earth rising into his senses. Soken pointed out that when Jiro played his flute in the town squares, his mind was exactly like this cracked stalk. He was trying to catch the breath of other people's praise to feel whole. But because their praise was as unpredictable as a mountain gale, his inner walls were constantly fracturing under the pressure of their judgment. The old man whispered that the youth was exhausting himself trying to repair a hollow pipe so that strangers would breathe life into it, all while ignoring the vast, silent ground beneath his feet. Jiro stood frozen in the gathering dark, his fingers still resting on the split bamboo. A profound wave of recognition washed over him, hitting his chest with the force of a physical blow. He realized that his entire life had been a frantic attempt to avoid this very split, this empty space inside himself that felt like a void whenever the applause stopped. He had believed that playing perfectly would seal the cracks, making him solid and safe from the terrifying sting of rejection. But looking at the broken green stalk in his hands, he saw the mirror of his own exhausted soul, a hollow form that had forgotten how to belong to the earth, existing only to be used, measured, and judged by the winds of the world. In a moment, this old builder will show us how to look past the broken instrument and find the stillness that never needed to be played. The valley was growing completely dark now, the evening mist rising from the stream to wrap the bamboo stalks in a thick, protective blanket of gray. The sharp, clean scent of the split green wood lingered in the air, anchoring Jiro to the present moment, away from his memories of critics and courts. Take a slow, weighted breath, letting your mind rest upon the image of that uncarved stalk, letting your own performative armor begin to loosen its grip in the safety of this quiet ravine. This old story is not telling us to stop feeling, nor is it asking us to become cold and indifferent to the world around us. It is not an invitation to build a stone wall around your heart, or to pretend that the kindness of others does not bring joy. It is showing us something much quieter, a deeper orientation of the spirit that allows us to walk through the world without being destroyed by its shifting weather. When we look closely at our chronic need to please, we begin to see that our suffering does not actually come from the fact that someone disapproved of us, or that an interaction felt slightly awkward. The true weight, the exhausting burden that keeps you awake at night, is found in the way the mind holds those moments after they have already passed. In the language of the heart, what we often call attachment is simply that tight, breathless grip that insists a situation must go exactly our way for us to be fundamentally at peace. It is the silent internal contract that says, if that person does not validate me, if that room does not welcome me with open arms, I am hollow and unsafe. This desperate craving is a fierce mechanism that turns our natural desire for connection into a source of constant terror. It forces us to treat every social interaction as a life or death audit of our worth. When someone fails to offer the nod of approval we seek, the mind instantly panics, interpreting their silence as a declaration of our emptiness. We become like a musician who refuses to rest until every single passerby has stopped to applaud, forgetting that music is born from silence and must eventually return to it. The ancient insights of the Buddha remind us that we do not have to live at the mercy of these passing gales. One of the great discoveries of this path is that your awareness, the quiet, spacious presence that is currently listening to these words, is fundamentally different from the thoughts and anxieties that move through it. This gentle mindfulness is nothing more than the capacity to look at a fear, to notice a sudden wave of people-pleasing panic without instantly becoming it. When you feel that familiar tightening in your throat after a conversation, awareness allows you to say, there is a worried thought here rather than I am a failure. It creates a small sacred clearing between the sting of an event and your reaction to it, ensuring you do not have to obey every nervous impulse your mind generates. When we begin to understand impermanence, not as a dry philosophical concept but as a living reality, the fear of rejection starts to lose its edge. Human opinions, moods, and judgments are the most fluid, unstable things in existence. A person's reaction to you is shaped by their own private exhaustion, their own hidden wounds, and the worries occupying their mind at that exact second. To anchor your sense of self in their evaluation is like trying to build a shelter on a shifting sand dune during a storm. Buddhist wisdom shows us that everything changes, including the opinions of those we are trying so desperately to impress. The praise that warms you at noon will inevitably fade by twilight, and the critical glance that stings you today will be forgotten by tomorrow. Recognizing this truth does not make life meaningless. It makes the pressure to be perfect entirely unnecessary. Our deepest suffering grows when the mind adds a second wound to the first. The first wound is simply what happens in life, the occasional misunderstanding, the natural drift of a relationship, or the simple fact that we cannot be everything to everyone. This is part of the human landscape. But the second wound is the fierce judgment we inflict upon ourselves for feeling hurt. It is the secondary spiral of overthinking, where we take a small moment of awkwardness and turn it into a total condemnation of our character. We tell ourselves we should have known better, we should have been funnier, or we should be completely immune to what others think. This inner warfare is what truly exhausts the heart. keeping the body locked in a state of high defense long after the room has grown completely quiet. Compassion. It's in this light is the quiet courage to meet your own vulnerability without turning it into self-hatred. It is the willingness to look at the people-pleaser inside you, the one who smiled until their jaw ached, and recognize that this pattern is not a shameful defect. It is simply an ancient, tired part of you that has been trying very hard to keep you safe from abandonment. By offering this gentle presence to your own fear, you stop feeding the loop of anxiety. You learn to hold the split in your green bamboo stalk with soft, unhurried hands, realizing that your true worth was never dependent on being an unblemished instrument. In a moment, this wisdom will move even closer to your own body, transitioning from a truth you understand in your mind to a physical weight you can truly rest into. The air in our dark valley remains still, completely unbothered by the heavy concepts we have just unpacked. The damp earth beneath the bamboo stalks continues to hold the roots in perfect balance, asking for no justification or proof of existence. Take another slow, intentional breath, letting the language of evaluation drop away as we prepare to settle the mind into a much deeper state of physical presence. If it feels right, let your attention gather gently within the boundaries of your own breathing body. There is no need to change how the air moves, nor is there any requirement to create a perfect state of stillness right now. Perhaps you can simply notice the physical sensation of the air entering your nostrils, cool and unhurried, and leaving a slightly warmer trail as it flows back out into the dark room. With each exhalation, you might allow the muscles of your jaw to unseal, letting the teeth part slightly, releasing that subconscious grip we hold when we are preparing to speak or defend ourselves in front of others. Let the back of your neck become long and heavy against your pillow, letting the weight of your skull sink downward, surrendered entirely to the support beneath you. As you lie here, you might bring your awareness down from the busy theater of the mind past the throat and let it rest deep within the lower abdomen. For so many hours today, your energy has been pulled upward and outward, floating like thin air as you scan the expressions of those around you. Right now, let that airy energy condense, becoming heavy like wet clay, settling deep into your center. There is no need to force this shift. Even noticing the rise and fall of your stomach is entirely enough. You do not have to perform this meditation perfectly. There is no audience here, no one to grade your piece, and no standard you need to meet to be worthy of this rest. In this quiet space, you might notice one specific thought or memory from today that is still asking for your attention. Perhaps it is a phrase you wish you could recall, a momentary silence that felt heavy, or a subtle feeling that you were not quite enough for the room you were in. Do not push this memory away, and do not dive into it to fix it. Instead, you might imagine holding that memory as the green, uncarved bamboo stalk we met in the ravine. See the jagged fracture running down its center, representing that cold panic of social exhaustion. In your mind's eye, you can gently place that specific worry directly into the open, hollow split of the stalk. Let the cracked bamboo hold the weight of that interaction for you. Watch what happens to that image when you stop trying to repair the split wood with your own hands. You might notice that as you leave the stalk resting in the damp peat of your imagination, the cool, wet mountain loam naturally begins to press against its sides. The dark, dense soil begins to fill the hollow center, burying the fracture under a heavy, warm layer of earth. The need to be a flawless instrument that plays beautiful melodies for strangers begins to dissolve, replaced by the simple, quiet reality of being a plant that belongs natively to the ground. The split does not need to be violently healed tonight. It is simply allowed to be filled with the steady, unbothered silence of the earth. If your mind drifts back to old calculations, or if a wave of self-judgment surfaces, remember that you can return to the heavy sensation of your body whenever you are ready. There is no urgency to achieve a sudden state of enlightenment, or to banish your desire for validation instantly. True transformation does not happen by forcing yourself into a state of artificial strength. It happens when you realize you are safe enough to let your hollow defenses drop into the soil. Let your breath become slow and dense, matching the rhythm of the damp valley floor where everything grows downward into safety before it ever tries to reach for the sky. In a moment, our journey will take us back into the ravine, following Jiro as he returns to the mud brick builder after many seasons have turned. The green bamboo stalk we have held in our minds will begin to reveal a deeper, more resilient secret about what lies beneath our performative existence. For now, simply allow yourself to remain right here, heavy and unexamined, letting each breath sink a fraction of an inch deeper into the quiet bedding of the night. 3 winters passed before Jiro returned to the low-lying bamboo grove. He had spent those years traveling from village to village, no longer performing in the grand courts of the capital. Yet the old ghost of comparison had not vanished entirely from his mind. He had managed to step away from the big stages, but within his heart he still carried a small, sharp measuring stick, silently comparing his quiet life to the roaring success of his peers who still played for emperors. A profound sense of isolation would occasionally grip him at night, a heavy doubt whispering that by stepping away from the applause, he had simply become irrelevant, a ghost fading into the background of a world that only valued loud and beautiful sounds. When he reached Soken's dwelling, he found the landscape altered. The old man was no longer making mud bricks by the pit. The cool, damp air instead carried the sharp, peppery aroma of crushed wild ginger roots. Soken was kneeling in a narrow trench near the crumbling stone foundation of an ancient, abandoned temple wall. In his weathered hands, he held an unpainted wooden spade, using it to press thick layers of dark, cold loam over a row of gnarled ginger rhizomes. The old builder looked older, his movements even more deliberate, his breath rising in small white plumes in the chilly mountain air. He greeted Jiro with a silent nod, handing him a second wooden spade without a single word of explanation. For hours, the 2 men worked side by side in total silence, the only sound being the heavy, rhythmic thud of damp soil falling over the hidden roots. Jiro's hands grew cold, covered in the rich gray silt of the ravine. As they dug deeper into the trench, the spade hit a solid obstruction near the base of the ancient temple wall. Jiro cleared away the loose dirt with his fingers, revealing a massive, thick network of ancient tree roots that had grown directly through the heavy granite stones of the foundation. The immense pressure of the earth had not crushed these roots instead. They had slowly, over decades, adapted their shape to the stone, winding through the cracks, gripping the dark underbelly of the mountain with an unyielding, silent strength. Soken stopped his spade, leaning against the wooden handle, and pointed toward the subterranean network. He noted that when the winter frost comes, it splits the hollow stalks that stand tall in the wind, but it cannot touch the roots that sleep 3 feet beneath the surface. The old man asked Jiro if he could hear the sound the roots made when they cracked through the stone foundation. Jiro looked at the ancient dark wood entwined with the rock and replied that they made no sound at all. Soken nodded slowly, explaining that the tree never asked the mountain for permission to grow, nor did it wait for the temple above to praise its strength. It simply grew downward into the absolute darkness, turning the heavy, cold stone into its own foundation. The old builder looked directly into Jiro's tired eyes, noting that the young man was still listening for the echoes of distant applause, wondering if his quiet life was a mistake. Soken told him that his suffering did not come from being invisible to the world. It came from his own resistance to being hidden. He explained that a heart that continuously seeks its reflection in the eyes of others will always remain thin and fragile, like a hollow reed. True transformation begins when you stop fighting the quiet seasons of your life and learn the art of growing downward. The old man advised Jiro to let his ambition become like the wild ginger root, completely dark, completely unpainted, yet full of a fierce, warming life that belongs entirely to itself. Jiro sat on the damp earth, his fingers resting against the cold, rough surface of the ancient root. The old urge to explain his choices, to defend his progress, or to seek a reassuring word from the master rose up in his throat. But instead of speaking, he simply paused. He took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool mountain air fill his lungs, and watched the impulse lose its power. He did not magically become a perfect master of design. In that moment, the old loneliness was still present, hovering like the winter mist around his shoulders. But for the first time in his life, he did not treat that lonely thought as an absolute truth. He did not try to fix it, nor did he use it as a weapon against himself. He simply picked up his wooden spade, pressed a fresh layer of dark loam over the wild ginger, and allowed himself to be exactly where he was hidden, quiet and deeply rooted in the cold, solid earth. In a moment, this shift will help us understand the hidden machinery of our own restless minds. The light was completely draining from the ravine now, the ancient stones of the foundation dissolving into the surrounding indigo shadows. The heavy, comforting scent of wet earth and wild ginger hung thick in the air, creating a protective boundary around the small trench. Take a slow, weighted breath, letting the image of those silent subterranean roots anchor your own awareness, letting the frantic need to be seen by the world sink down into the deep, warm sanctuary of the soil. When we look beneath the surface of our Latinite overthinking, we find a complex hidden machinery that the mind constructs in a desperate attempt to find safety. We often believe that if we can just reevaluate our past conversations one more time, or if we can accurately project every possible reaction to our future actions, we will finally achieve a state of permanent security. This constant rehearsing of what is yet to come, and the relentless replaying of what has already transpired, is actually a subtle form of control. The mind treats uncertainty as an enemy, mistakenly believing that its anxiety is a protective shield. We assume that by worrying about how we are perceived, we are doing the necessary work to prevent exile or rejection, completely unaware that this very process is what is draining our life force. A particularly painful part of this internal mechanism is the habit of trying to fix ourselves through shame. When an interaction feels awkward, or when we sense that someone did not fully validate us, the mind immediately turns inward with a sharp, critical eye. We begin to tell ourselves a heavy story about our core inadequacy, using self-judgment as a tool to force our behavior into a more acceptable, pleasing shape. This pattern is often so deeply ingrained that we do not even recognize it as a choice. It feels like an absolute truth. Over time, we begin to turn our emotional pain into a rigid identity, defining ourselves as a fundamentally flawed person who must constantly work to earn a place at the table, rather than a living being who is simply experiencing a temporary wave of vulnerability. This is precisely where the timeless psychological clarity of Buddhist wisdom offers a different path. It introduces a vital distinction between what is known as the first pain and the second pain. The first pain is simply the raw material that life brings to our door, the natural sting of a cold look, the genuine disappointment of a misunderstood word, or the simple reality of being unliked by certain individuals. These moments are unavoidable aspects of human existence. We cannot always control when or how they arrive, just as the ancient tree cannot control when the freezing winter frost settles into the valley. This first pain is sharp, but it is limited, passing through our awareness like weather over a landscape. The true source of our exhaustion, however, is the second pain, which is entirely constructed by the mind's resistance to that initial sting. The second pain is the massive structure of interpretation, blame, and catastrophic thinking we build around a single moment of vulnerability. It is the voice that takes a small, quiet silence from a friend and transforms it into an absolute confirmation that we are unlovable and bound to end up alone. We cannot stop the first pain from occasionally touching our lives, but we can absolutely learn to stop feeding this secondary fire. Every time we catch ourselves spinning an elaborate theory about our unworthiness and choose to simply breathe instead, we are starving the second pain of the fuel it requires to keep us awake. True peace, therefore, is never found by engineering a life that is entirely free from difficulty, awkwardness, or social friction. It is found by developing an entirely different relationship with those challenges when they arise. When you stop demanding that every person you meet must mirror your worth back to you, a profound shift occurs in your internal landscape. You begin to realize that an uncomfortable social interaction is not a structural failure of your identity. It is simply a passing event, no more defining than a gust of wind blowing against the outside of your window frame. You can allow the room to be cold or the conversation to be uneven without assuming that your core self has been fractured. By understanding this mechanism, your relationship with your own nervous patterns begins to soften. You can look at the chronic people-pleaser within you, not with a sense of failure or frustration, but with the quiet, non-judgmental awareness that sees a frightened child trying to survive. This awareness does not need to violently fix or eliminate the anxiety. The moment you observe the pattern without identifying with it, its hold over your body begins to slacken. You are no longer a hollow pipe being tossed around by the opinions of others. You are the vast, stable ground that can hold both the wind and the silence without losing its native density. In a moment, we will bring this structural understanding directly into the texture of your modern daily life, looking at how this root-like presence functions in the ordinary moments that usually trigger our exhaustion. The night air outside your room remains vast, unhurried, and perfectly balanced, holding no opinions about your progress or your failures. Let your body continue to drop its heavy weight into this supportive darkness, allowing each gentle breath to remind you that your value requires no external validation to be absolutely complete right now. This hidden stability is not something you must wait to practice until you are sitting perfectly still in a quiet room or standing in an isolated mountain grove. True peace is practiced in the very small, ordinary moments that make up the texture of your modern daily life. It is found in that exact second when you are waiting for a text message response, watching the small screen glow in the dark, and you feel that familiar, cold knot of anxiety tightening in your chest because the reply has not arrived. In that moment, the old habit of your mind is to check the device every 30 seconds, frantically scanning for reassurance, treating the digital silence as an immediate proof that you have done something wrong. Wisdom begins when you notice that urge. Take a slow breath before touching the glass, and realize that the silence of another person does not make your own inner ground any less solid. We live in a world that constantly encourages us to treat our bodies like hollow instruments, forcing us to smile and pretend we are completely fine, even when our hearts feel incredibly heavy inside. You might find yourself moving through a crowded room, nodding along to conversations you are barely hearing, while a quiet storm of self-judgment is playing out behind your eyes. We check our phones. We compare our quiet, unpolished daily realities to the loud, curated successes of people we have never met, and we instantly decide that we are falling hopelessly behind in life. The mind spins a frantic story of urgency, telling you that if you do not fix your personality, your career, or your relationships by tomorrow, you will be left entirely alone. But a profound realization occurs when you discover that not every thought deserves your obedience, and not every anxious feeling is a command that you must follow. When you feel that sudden spike of panic telling you to double-check if someone is upset with you, you can choose to simply sit with the discomfort rather than running to fix it. A single breath taken before answering a sharp email or a defensive comment is a form of immense spiritual discipline. It is a way of declaring that you are no longer willing to let your inner walls be fractured by every changing breeze. You can learn to care deeply about the people in your life without gripping their opinions so tightly that you crush your own peace of mind. You can love them from a place of abundance, as a sturdy tree offers shade, rather than as a beggar pleading for a crumb of validation. This means you are also allowed to rest tonight without having to earn it through a day of perfect performance. Many of us carry a subtle, heavy guilt whenever we try to soften, believing that if we are not constantly producing, adjusting, or making ourselves useful to others, we are failing. But your worth as a living being is not a commodity that rises and falls based on how much applause you manage to secure today. You do not have to fix your whole life before you are allowed to close your eyes, nor do you need to apologize for needing a sanctuary from the demands of the world. Rest is not a reward for a flawless performance. It is the natural, native right of a heart that belongs to the earth. Let this root mind come into your physical awareness right now as you lie beneath the covers. When the memory of an old mistake tries to pull your attention back up into the cold air of overthinking, let the weight of your body serve as an anchor, gently drawing you back down into the immediate present. You can acknowledge that the awkward interaction happened without allowing it to define your entire nature. By choosing to let the thought rest without feeding it with secondary arguments, you are slowly teaching your nervous system that it is safe to stop scanning the horizon for threats. In a moment, The final echoes of these concepts will begin to dissolve entirely, allowing the teaching to transition from words into pure, unexamined rest. The room around you is growing heavier, the dark air holding your presence without a single judgment or condition. You do not need to be a beautiful instrument playing for the world tonight. You are simply a silent root sleeping deeply under the frost, completely hidden, completely safe, and utterly whole in your own quiet dark. The words are beginning to thin out now, losing their shape and drifting away like the last wisps of valley mist dissolving into the heavy dark of the ravine. The need to understand, the need to analyze, and the need to remember these lessons can all be laid down on the floor beside your bed. Your body is becoming beautifully heavy, sinking a fraction deeper into the quiet dark. With every single breath you release, the muscles in your face are completely soft, the forehead smooth, the eyelids weighted with a natural, comforting darkness that requires no defense. Let the rhythm of your chest slow down, matching the deep, unhurried breathing of the cold mountain soil when the winter air grows still. There is absolutely nothing left to solve tonight. The public theater has been entirely locked up. The bright lights are turned off, and the voices that evaluated your steps have vanished into the distance. You do not need to carry your history, your name, or your social face inside this mattress. Let yourself slip out of the performative armor that you wore so bravely during the day. You are entering a dense, silent sanctuary where nobody is watching, nobody is measuring, and nobody is waiting to grade your presence. The space around you holds you with an absolute, unconditional safety, treating your vulnerability not as a failure, but as a quiet return to the earth. Let your awareness sink completely down into the dark loam of your lower body, far beneath the thin air where anxieties are rehearsed. Imagine yourself as that wild ginger root, sleeping deeply 3 inches beneath the frozen forest floor, entirely unpainted, entirely hidden, and beautifully self-sustained. The frost may touch the open sky above, and the wind may blow through the hollow bamboo stalks in the upper world. But down here in the dark peat, there is only a warm, dense, and unbroken peace. You are connected to a foundation that is far too deep to be shaken by the opinions of passers-by. With every slow breath, you are growing downward, anchoring yourself in a native belonging that never needed to be earned through applause. Let the heavy blanket above you feel like the protective layers of earth pressing against your sides, filling every hollow crack, cradling your tired heart in a velvet stillness. You have permission to let go of the entire world now. You have permission to stop managing your identity, to stop checking the mirrors, and to simply allow your consciousness to dissolve into the deep, dark soil of sleep. Slowly, the mind untethers itself from the shore of waking life, floating out into a boundless, silent ocean where no sounds need to be made. The breath becomes a quiet whisper, a gentle tide moving through a landscape that has forgotten the weight of words. You are safe here in the hidden dark, completely unexamined and profoundly whole. And what if the deep sense of worth you have been begging the world to give you was never something they could hold, but was always the silent, indestructible ground that has been holding you all along? The dark soil of the valley does not ask the seed if it has been flawless before it offers its embrace, nor does the mountain stream demand a beautiful song from the stones before it bathes them in its cool, continuous flow. As you rest deeper into the mattress, let this realization seep into the very center of your bones. The frantic parts of the mind that spent the day striving, performing, and rearranging your words to protect against a cold glance are finally being absorbed into a vast, unconditioned space. This space is what remains when you stop pretending to be a finished monument for the world to admire, and simply allow yourself to be a living, breathing participant in the quiet night. In this deep sanctuary, the ancient insight of non-self transforms from a complex thought into a soft, physical relaxation. The self that we protect so fiercely, the one that feels wounded by a lack of appreciation or terrified by a momentary silence, is not a solid, permanent structure that can ever be broken. It is a passing cloud, a temporary arrangement of old memories, habits, and social fears that the mind mistakenly tries to solidify into an armor. When you see through this illusion, you realize there is actually no independent, isolated self inside you that can ever be exiled or rejected by the world. You are not a solitary figure standing under an alien sky, desperately trying to prove you belong. You are the sky itself, holding every passing cloud of judgment, every brief flash of praise, and every heavy shadow of doubt with an equal, unbothered spaciousness. Let your breathing become even more effortless now, as if the dark room itself is doing the breathing for you. The air moves in and out of your lungs without any conscious direction, a quiet reminder that you are already entirely integrated into the fabric of this living world. You do not need to construct an elaborate worthiness through your achievements or your charm, because your existence is already fundamentally woven into the ground beneath you and the air around you. The silent tree roots beneath the ancient temple wall do not strive to be strong, they simply surrender to their downward nature, allowing the dark loam to nurture them in total obscurity. Tonight, you can imitate that profound surrender, leaving the thin, windy heights of human evaluation behind and dropping your awareness entirely into the warm, heavy depth of pure being. Let the final fragments of your daytime thoughts sink beneath the surface like small grains of sand, settling at the very bottom of a deep, midnight pool. There is no longer any need to keep watch, no longer any need to maintain the pleasant mask, and no longer any need to monitor how your life is progressing compared to others. Every expectation has been gently unknotted, every social calculation dissolved by the cold, cleansing mist of the ravine. The heavy fabric of the bedding holds your form in absolute stillness, shielding you from the demands of tomorrow, providing a safe, unexamined perimeter where your spirit can fully uncoil. You are allowed to be invisible tonight. You are allowed to be completely silent, completely unpolished, and completely at rest in the comforting velvet of the hidden dark. The rhythm of the night continues its slow, majestic dance outside your window, entirely unconcerned with the anxieties that occupied your afternoon. The damp earth continues to hold the wild ginger roots in perfect security, nourishing them in the deep, dark winter silence where no external eyes can see. Let yourself slide completely over the edge of wakefulness now, trusting the heavy density of your body, trusting the spacious stillness of your mind, and letting your awareness fade into the vast, restorative ocean of an unjudged sleep. The deep stillness of this midnight landscape expands even further now, stretching out into the quiet hours of the night like an unbroken canvas of velvet shadow. As the awareness of your physical body continues to soften and settle into the mattress, let the realization wash over you that you are not a separate fragment trying to find its way into the world. In the profound architecture of Buddhist insight, we learn that the boundary we draw between ourselves and the rest of existence is as fluid as a line drawn on water. The fear of being excluded or deemed insufficient only exists when we believe we are an isolated entity that must constantly fight to secure its own borders. But when you look at the roots traveling through the earth, or the air moving seamlessly across the valley, it becomes clear that there is no place where you end and the rest of life begins. This deep truth removes the very foundation of your social exhaustion, the need to impress, the habit of over-polishing your expressions, and the subtle terror of being misunderstood are all based on the belief that your worth is a fragile object that must be defended from others. When you discover that you are actually part of the very ground you stand on, the concept of rejection loses its meaning entirely. A wave cannot be rejected by the ocean, and a root cannot be exiled from the soil that feeds it. You are natively, structurally, and eternally a part of this living tapestry, requiring no special permission, no extraordinary talent, and no external applause to justify your presence in this space tonight. Let the weight of this understanding settle behind your closed eyelids, soothing the small, tired muscles of your face that spent the day trying to navigate the expectations of the world. With every slow, deep exhalation, you can consciously invite the residual tension in your chest to dissolve into the surrounding room. Let the ribcage rise and fall like the gentle, rhythmic shifting of the earth under a midnight sky. There is no longer any need to project a specific image of yourself, no longer any need to maintain a clever narrative about your success, and no longer any need to explain your quiet choices to anyone. The performance has concluded, the curtains have fallen, and the audience has departed into the night, leaving you completely alone with the vast, comforting presence of your own unconditioned being. Think of how much energy it takes to continuously build and rebuild a likable persona, day after day, hour after hour, like someone trying to hold up a heavy wooden sign in a strong wind. Tonight, you can simply drop your hands and let the sign fall to the ground. Let the character you play during the daylight hours rest completely outside the blanket, allowing yourself to return to the simple, raw state of pure awareness. This awareness has no name, no career, no social status, and no mistakes to correct it. Is the quiet, luminous space that simply notices the cool touch of the air and the heavy warmth of the bedding. It is a sanctuary that can never be diminished by a critical word or enhanced by 1,000 compliments. As the night grows deeper, the entire valley of your mind begins to wrap itself in a thick, protective blanket of absolute silence. The memories of the day, the texts left unanswered, the conversations that felt uneven, the subtle feelings of falling behind are all fading into the distance, turning into tiny, insignificant specks of dust that are naturally carried away by the cool mountain breeze. You are sinking down past the layer of thoughts, past the layer of memories, descending directly into the rich, warm loam of an unexamined rest. There is nothing left to monitor, nothing left to predict, and nothing left to fix before the morning arrives. The heavy fabric of the bedding holds you in perfect, unconditional safety, providing a secure perimeter where your heart can finally stop its vigilant scanning. You do not need to be an instrument that makes beautiful sounds for the world. Tonight you are allowed to be completely hidden, completely silent, and completely invisible in the deep winter dark. Let your breath become a faint, effortless whisper, a slow tide carrying you further and further away from the shore of waking concerns. Trust the dark, heavy density of the earth beneath you. Trust the boundless stillness that envelops your mind, and allow your entire consciousness to dissolve completely into the restorative, velvet embrace of a deep, unjudged sleep. The vast space of this deep rest deepens even further, like a valley folding itself into the quiet dark as the last embers of a campfire go out. As you sink into this soft layer of existence, let the understanding settle into your heart that the quietness you feel right now is not an empty absence. In our waking hours, we often confuse quietness with being forgotten or left behind, as if a day without noise or validation is a day where we have ceased to matter. But Buddhist wisdom points toward a much richer truth. The silence that remains when you stop striving is actually the very ground of your true nature. It is the unconditioned space that exists before a single expectation was ever placed upon your shoulders, a place of pure, untouched resource that doesn't need to perform to be real. When we look at the natural world, we see that the most profound forces are always the ones that operate in total, unhurried secrecy. The deep roots beneath the ancient stone foundation do not announce their growth, nor do they seek a reward for holding the heavy walls steady through the winter rains. They simply exist in alignment with the earth, trusting the dark loam to give them structure and life. In the same way, the true essence of who you are does not live in the loud announcements of your achievements, or in the bright spaces where you try so hard to please everyone around you. Your true strength is found in your capacity to return to this hidden center, to sit with the uncarved, silent parts of your own heart, and to realize that you are already complete just as you are. Let this knowing filter down through the remaining layers of your awareness, smoothing out the tiny lines of tension that still linger in the corners of your mind. With every soft rise and fall of your chest, you are shedding the need to be an answer to anyone else's question. You are letting go of the exhausting habit of measuring your life against a clock or a crowd, recognizing that your journey moves in its own sacred, subterranean rhythm. There is no one to catch up to, no standard to fulfill, and no version of yourself that you need to manufacture tonight to be worthy of taking up space on this earth. You are allowed to simply breathe, letting the air move through you like a gentle stream flowing over smooth river stones in the dark. Think of how much lighter it feels to exist without the burden of constant self-judgment, to look at your own vulnerability and see it not as a flaw, but as a tender, natural part of being alive. The part of you that felt anxious today, the part that checked for reassurance or worried about a misunderstood word, is simply a tired traveler looking for a place to rest its heavy bags. Tonight, you can gently set those bags down on the floor of this quiet ravine. You can let the dark, dense soil of your inner sanctuary absorb the weight of every past conversation and every future worry, leaving you light, unburdened, and entirely free to rest. The night air continues to hold the room in a protective stillness, a vast expanse of dark velvet that asks nothing from you but your willingness to soften. The memories of the afternoon are losing their color, drifting away like dry leaves carried into the deep shadows of the bamboo grove, leaving only the immediate, soothing reality of this present moment. You are no longer navigating the complex currents of the waking world. You are simply a resting presence, safe, unseen, and entirely cared for by the steady ground beneath you. Let yourself glide fully into the deeper currents of sleep now, letting the mind grow heavy and soft as the body surrenders to the mattress. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to analyze, and nothing left to protect before the morning sun touches the hills. Trust the quiet, dark gravity that is pulling you downward into a deep, restorative stillness. Let your breathing become an absolute whisper, a slow and rhythmic tide carrying you further into the warm, unexamined sanctuary of the night, resting deeply in the velvet embrace of a sleep that requires no justification. This unexamined rest spreads through the body like water soaking into deep, parched earth, moving into every space where the tension of the day was held. When we allow ourselves to drop into this state of complete surrender, a deeper layer of the Buddhist teaching begins to reveal its true warmth. We spend our entire lives trying to be the author of our own safety, believing that if we can just perfect our actions, we can control how the world treats us. But the truest peace comes when we realize that we do not have to fabricate safety through our own effort. Safety is not a fortress you build with your achievements. It is the natural consequence of realizing that you are already an inseparable part of the vast, unmoving ground that supports everything. Consider how a single leaf on a great tree does not spend its nights worrying about whether it has done enough to earn its place on the branch. It does not compare its greenness to the leaf beside it, nor does it lose its rest wondering if the root below will continue to send up nourishment in the morning. It simply rests in the quiet custody of the tree, trusting the larger life that moves through its veins. You, too, can drop that heavy human burden of constant self-assessment tonight. You can let the complex narrative of who you think you are, your successes, your shortcomings, your social standing dissolve into the dark, comforting landscape of this room. You are allowed to return to the simple, unadorned state of being a living thing that is cared for by the universe, breathing in rhythm with the silent forests and the distant, dark oceans. Let this deep release soften the muscles around your chest, allowing the heart to expand without the constant need to protect itself from judgment. For so long, you have treated every thought as if it were an absolute truth, an urgent memo that required your immediate attention and response. But as you lie here in the stillness, you can see that thoughts are nothing more than passing ripples on the surface of an immense, deep well. They do not change the quality of the water below, and they do not define the depth of the well itself. You can let the worries about tomorrow float away without your intervention, recognizing that the space inside you is already perfectly vast and untouched by any passing concern. Think of how beautifully simple life becomes when you no longer require the world to tell you who you are. The old habit of checking for reassurance, of adjusting your reflection in the minds of others, is completely useless in this midnight environment. There is no one here to impress, no one to please, and no one to judge the quality of your rest. You are entirely free to be hidden, to be unmapped, and to let your consciousness sink deep beneath the surface of language. The teaching has settled into the very cells of your body now, transforming from a philosophy into a physical weight that gently pulls you closer and closer to the threshold of deep, restorative sleep. The room around you remains perfectly still, a dark and protective womb that asks for nothing but your willingness to let go. The memories of the day have lost their gravity, turning into faint, distant shadows that have no power over your current peace. You are no longer navigating the complex web of social expectations. You are simply a silent root resting in the warm, dark loam of the night, entirely whole and profoundly safe in your own quiet presence. Let yourself slip completely into the deeper currents of rest now, letting the mind become completely soft as the body surrenders its final defenses to the mattress. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to analyze, and nothing left to fix before the world wakes up. Trust the quiet, dark gravity that is drawing you downward into a state of absolute stillness. Let your breathing become a faint, effortless echo, a slow and rhythmic tide carrying you further into the vast, unexamined sanctuary of the night, resting deeply in the velvet embrace of a sleep that requires no justification, no proof, and no permission to be complete. This baseline wholeness belongs to you in the dark, shining quietly beneath every layer of conditioning, every memory of social failure, and every anxious expectation you carried through the waking day. In the profound silence of this moment, we come to understand the ultimate beauty of the uncarved bamboo and the hidden root. They teach us that our true nature cannot be added to by praise, nor can it be diminished by criticism. We often spend our entire lives walking on a tightrope of validation, believing that if we can just perform perfectly for one more hour, we will finally arrive at a place of permanent safety. But Buddhist insight reveals that the platform we are trying so hard to build through the approval of others is completely unnecessary, because the spacious ground of awareness is already supporting us from beneath, entirely independent of the world's applause. Let this understanding soothe the very deepest recesses of your mind, allowing any remaining knots of overthinking to untangle on their own. When you look back at the day from this space of profound stillness, you can see that the urge to please was never a moral defect or a permanent flaw in your character. It was simply a temporary habit of defense, a gentle mist that temporarily obscured the mountain of your inner being. You do not need to fight that mist or hate yourself for feeling anxious. The mountain does not wage war against the clouds that drift across its peak. It simply stands firm, rooted deep within the earth, allowing the weather to come and go as it pleases. Tonight, you can be the mountain, letting the fleeting judgments and shifting moods of the world pass completely over you, without shifting a single stone of your inner sanctuary. With each soft, unhurried breath, let your awareness travel even deeper down into the resting density of your physical form. Feel the heavy, supportive surface beneath you, absorbing the last traces of performance from your muscles, your throat, and your chest. The modern world tells us that we must always be broadcasted, always visible, and always ready to explain our worth to an invisible audience. But the quiet dark of this room offers an entirely different invitation, a sacred permission to be completely unmapped, completely unmeasured, and completely anonymous. In this deep winter grove of your own consciousness, your name, your history, and your daily struggles are nothing more than faint echoes from a distant valley that you have long since left behind. Think of the infinite relief that arrives when you realize that you no longer need to use other people's minds as a mirror to see if you are enough. The mirror is empty, the reflections have faded, and what remains is the pure, unconditioned light of your own presence, breathing quietly in the dark. You can care for the people in your life without becoming a prisoner to their perceptions. You can offer your unique melody to the world without requiring the world to give you an identity in return. You are whole not because you are perfect, but because you are an expression of the very same life force that animates the silent roots, the opening seeds, and the vast starlit sky above. The darkness around you is soft, dense, and protective, forming an absolute boundary between the demands of the daylight and the profound sanctuary of your rest. The thoughts of the afternoon have lost their momentum, turning into tiny, weightless autumn leaves that are naturally carried down the mountain stream into the quiet shadows of the ravine. There is nothing left to defend, nothing left to rehearse, and no further calculations to make before the morning light returns. You have arrived at the very center of your own home, a place of native belonging that requires no credentials, no effort, and no justification to inhabit. Let yourself sink completely into the deeper, velvety currents of sleep now, letting the mind become completely translucent as the body drops its final defenses into the quiet mattress. The breath has become an absolute whisper, a slow and rhythmic tide carrying you far beyond the boundaries of language and concept. Trust the immense dark gravity that is drawing you downward into a state of total, unbothered stillness. Allow your entire being to dissolve into the warm, unexamined depth of the night, resting profoundly in the silent, self-sustained embrace of a sleep that knows no judgment, holds no expectations, and is already completely perfect just as it is.